special welcome to today's podcast. I am excited to be joined by Steve, all the way from the UK. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Sarah. Really good to be with you this morning. Thank you for inviting me.
It's such a pleasure to have you on this podcast today as we discuss this very important topic of mental health and just how to prevent suicide cases within communities. Let's start the conversation by you just telling us who you are, the journey you've walked, and how you got involved with what you do now.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Yes, for many years, for 30 years, I've worked in senior management and consultancy, and for the last 11 years, ran my own consultancy practice, and that specialised in social media coaching and training for larger corporate businesses, smaller to medium-sized businesses as well, and also universities and business schools. And LinkedIn was very much kind of a specialism of mine, but I did focus on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And people often look at me and my age and say, "Well, you're not a millennial. What do you know about social media?" But yeah, I had quite a big following, and probably in the UK, it had a very strong reputation for the work we were doing. That world changed very suddenly, very dramatically and tragically on December the 4th of 2019, now almost 3 years ago, of course, when I was working with a large automotive company in the Midlands here in the UK, had a drive home of around about 3.5 hours I was about to undertake when I got an incoming call from the girlfriend of my 34-year-old son, my son Jordan. Was at home, and Charlotte had returned home to find very tragically that he'd taken his own life. And as you can probably imagine, that call, I know the call lasted 2 minutes because I subsequently looked back at that for a piece I wrote about this. But I kind of remember the first 15 seconds, really. I just remember Charlotte apologizing and then saying Jordan had killed himself. And that moment, my world just changed completely. As you can imagine, the weeks and months after that were dealing with our own trauma, and both physical and mental trauma we were dealing with, but also everything that you have to deal with when your child takes their own life. He was an independent young man, had a very successful career, had his own house. But of course, we had to deal with all his house and everything that from investments to his banks to all the things that have to be dealt with there. But very shortly after, because we were experiencing suicide for the very first time in my life, really, I'd never experienced anything like this. And just to add some context, Jordan was diagnosed with clinical anxiety and depression 4.5 years earlier. But he was an independent young man. He lived separately, and we didn't see each other every week. And as far as we were aware, he was managing his mental health through antidepressants and coping. He held a career. He went to work. We knew he had his very difficult moments and challenges, but none of us expected what happened that day. I think in hindsight, we maybe should have done. But I think, speaking for myself particularly, my knowledge of mental health and suicide 3 years ago was very poor. I do feel I should have been better educated, given my son had a mental health illness. But my knowledge was very poor. And when your knowledge is poor, you don't really know how to respond or ask the right questions or behave at all. But we went through a very traumatic time, very difficult time. And 3 weeks after Jordan's death, I took to LinkedIn and I published an article just about what we were going through. And I did that for two reasons, really. One, to kind of say, are we the only people going through this? Is there anyone else out there that's ever experienced anything like this? Because we had no roadmap or didn't know what to do. But I also wanted to share just this huge impact that it had had on us as a family, in the hope that it would maybe prevent someone else from choosing the same path.
Mm.
And the responses I got were huge globally. I had this huge outpouring. The article went viral on LinkedIn. I had psychologists contacting me. I had people that had lost loved ones to suicide, all kinds of people. And then I had people contacting me who had been considering suicide or were considering suicide or struggling with their mental health. And a large number of them were saying, as a result of reading this article, I've decided not to end my own life. And that was kind of the start of the journey for me, really, Sarah. I suddenly realized that I knew I had a voice on social media, but I now realized that potentially that voice was going to change. And that was kind of really the start of the journey to what I'm doing now, really.
Mm, mm, mm. I am so sorry about your loss, Steve. That can be easy for any parent to go through what you've gone through. But I honor you for taking up the challenge to educate the masses and, to make a meaningful contribution out of the pain that your family has been through. So thank you so much for your generous spirit and generous heart to be able to share such valuable information. And like you rightly said, a lot of people are actually not quite educated about this topic. So I don't know about you. When we grew up, and I'm a woman in my mid 40s, mental health was not such a big thing. In fact, I don't remember so many of my friends that actually struggled with mental health. And this is a conversation that, I've been having with my teenage children and their friends. And I've got a child who's a young adult. And, just trying to understand this new landscape of mental health and just the struggle that comes, with mental health. Yeah, it's actually been quite a learning curve for me myself, to just wrap my head around this seemingly new phenomena. Because in the past, we never used to have as many cases as we see now. Although, my kids actually say, Mom, the cases probably were there, but people were not speaking out, which could be a possibility as well. So what are you finding? Do you find from your research that, there's been an increase, or it's always been this way?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, firstly, thank you for your kind words about my own situation. I really, really appreciate that. But I think the question you pose is really interesting because mental health has a much higher profile now than it ever did before, and that's a good thing that we are talking much more about mental health in a way we didn't do before. That creates its own challenges, of course, because the more that people are being open about their mental health and seeking help in the process, we're now seeing huge pressures on the mental health services. Certainly in the UK, we would describe the mental health services as a breaking point. They're unable to provide consults and support within the NHS here in good time. Some people are waiting 12 or 24 months. We've got children waiting for 24 months to see somebody about their mental health. Some of those children are actually in that process becoming adults in that time.
Yeah.
And then suddenly having to be referred in a different direction. So is this because more people are struggling with their mental health? I do think there are, in the last 10 years particularly, there have been new challenges. The way that we engage and communicate, social media, the internet. We've seen many new things to cope with that we never had before. Arguably, life was simpler, before all these things came along. But I also think that for many years, mental health issues were around us. But our generations, and certainly talk about my generation and my parents' generation prior to that, We often talk about it being a very British thing, but I think it's a global thing as well, that we had a very stiff upper lip, that we, as we would say, that we just get on with life. Life is tough. You just get on with it. If you are struggling with your mental health for whatever reason, you just get up and get on with life. And of course, we know that's had many implications for generations and people. So I think mental health has always been there. I think your children are right to say that. But I think there are new pressures in society, new expectations and challenges that are adding to the issues that we're seeing now.
Thank you. Thank you for just bringing clarity. And yeah, I agree. I think, there's a possibility that, we always had, these issues, but people never spoke up. So then let's start, diving into this conversation by defining what mental health is. How would you define mental health?
Oh gosh, right. Well, I have to preface this by saying I'm not a mental health professional. That's really, really important to understand. So, but I have learned a lot in 3 years. I have immersed myself in this world. I've spoken to many psychologists and professionals, read many books, and engaged with many people that have had and have mental health issues or have suicidal thoughts. So, what is my definition of mental health? I would say that is probably how we process the world and everything that comes in, and how what we process affects us internally in our mind, and how we make decisions and judgments about what these things mean to us. Everyone experiences very similar things happening to them, but how they process and assimilate that and what that means to them personally is very different. So two of us may experience an event, maybe even a traumatic event. One might cope very well with that because they're able to process it in a logical way. Someone else might have a highly emotional response to that, and it can affect them quite severely in terms of trauma. So it really is, my definition as a non-medical person is to say that it's how we process the world and everything going on around us. And some of us have good mental health, where we can perform under stress and difficult situations really well. We can communicate with the world and engage with the world really effectively. And other people have poor mental health, where they can't do that. They find it much more difficult to engage with the world and process things and what those things mean to them. So if there are any psychologists listening to this, hopefully there's a few nods there, but it's certainly not a medical definition from me.
Thank you. So then let's explore and just look at how a parent, or a supervisor or a manager or even a colleague, in a workplace or at home as a parent, how do you see that, the family member or, your team member is struggling with mental health? Are there signs that people can look out for?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I talk about a lot. I deliver a lot of talks to organisations on this subject, but they're very similar conversations to the ones I have with parents and other people too, who are concerned maybe about a loved one or someone that they know. Often, yes, there will be signs that you will see changes in behaviour. Typically, those changes in behaviour can be everything from a low mood, perhaps people being more tired than they would be normally, that maybe they are being more emotional in their behaviors, more tearful or upset, or maybe even getting more angry in work situations and confrontational. Maybe their language is very evident, saying things such as, "I've just had enough of this, I can't do this anymore." So we might hear language. We might just see things in their surroundings that are different. We might go to someone's house and see that maybe there are a few more beer bottles or wine bottles in the recycling, or we might see a duvet cover on a sofa, and find out that person is sleeping on the sofa more. We might see people engaging in what we call risk-taking activities, where they are, say, drinking more, or maybe online gambling is happening a lot, or they're just driving their car a bit recklessly, or riding their bike, in a manner where they've not got a real consideration for their own safety, or even those that they're with sometimes. And the list can go on, that we could, but if we distill it all down, what it is it's an instinct to say, this person's behavior has changed from what I've known before. So we don't necessarily need a long list, Sarah. We just need to say, something inside me is telling me that something has changed, and this change in behavior has been going on for longer than a week and longer than 2 weeks, where a medical definition would normally come in if a prolonged behavior, if someone was struggling with their sleep, for example, and this had carried on for a period of 2 weeks or longer, a doctor or a medical professional would probably determine that there was a mental health issue that needed to be explored at that point. I'm going to caveat this, though, as well, and say that these signs are not always easy to see. So it is a case of just, has there been a change, even if you can't quite put your finger on what that change is? And therefore, if there is, should I be having a conversation with that person?
Such a very helpful explanation that you give. So then, how can family members help? Let's start with the family setup, where you notice that somebody in your family context is battling mentally, or you see all these changes. How do you support such a one?
Yeah, again, a question I get asked a lot, really, Sarah. And I'd like to just kind of take a step back, just briefly, and go a step back from there. We live in a world and society now where we are all extremely busy. Families are busy. Mum and dad, or dad and dad, or mum and mum these days, are working often, both with careers, extremely busy. Kids are busy with all they've got on, and their iPhones and their tablets and all the things they do, and television, Netflix, everything that goes on. And what we've lost to a large degree, very old and traditional, if you like, kind of family situations where everyone would sit around the dinner table, have a meal together and talk and go for walks together, and all the things that maybe would have happened in generations gone by, where these conversations would happen maybe much more easily. So what is happening now, people are having to find the moment, find the time to have the conversation. And that's not always easy, where the teenager is locked away in the bedroom on their PC playing Minecraft or something like that, and knock on the door, can I come in and talk about your mental health? Well, not right now, Dad, I'm on level 4 of Minecraft, so that is more difficult. So I think the first thing is, if we talk about families particularly now, because this is an important one, I know, for a lot of people, teenagers, not easy to speak to at the best of times. Okay, they're going through that transition in life. So I think it is about finding the right moment and the right environment. And that could be that you're driving them to school, or you're driving them somewhere, and you're looking out of the window. I've heard this used a lot. Parents who said, I found it much easier to talk to my teenage son or daughter rather than looking at them face to face. I'm going to sit down and have a conversation with you now about your mental health. Oh, gosh, this is all feeling very confrontational. A lot of parents have said, when we're driving and just kind of looking out of the window forward and start having a conversation where I'm not having to look at them in the eyes, has often been quite easy. And you could be out for a walk, you could be washing the dishes, you could be, and it's just, that conversation, just, and it could just start with, look, how are things at school at the moment? How are things in this situation? And, I've just noticed lately that And whatever it is you've noticed, that is maybe the moment to kind of introduce it. And I just wanted to say, look, I'm firstly, I'm here. I want to let you know you're here, that I'm here, for you. But I have noticed this, and look, we're alone, we're together. Is there anything that you kind of want to share with me? And I'll listen. I'm not going to judge you in any way. I don't necessarily have the answers or the solutions here, but I just wanted to listen if there's anything you wanted to share with me. And that's kind of the way maybe to start to open up, a conversation with someone here. We've got a great TV campaign just started in the last few weeks on ITV, one of the channels, independent channels over here. And it is about better Get Britain Better Talking campaign, and Get Britain Get Talking, sorry, it's called. And it shows a commercial, a video between a father and his teenage daughter, and just having that conversation. It's a really powerful video, actually, and just shows that, it's a little awkward, but you've got to find the moment, and you've got to ask the questions, but importantly, show you're there to support, not to judge, and not to think you've got the answers either is really important. The answers will come, but not at that moment.
Thank you for bringing such practical advice. And I think it releases you as a person, particularly as a parent as well, to have that mindset that, you don't have the answers. So you just have to support. You're probably not going to figure out everything because, things look quite complicated with mental health. But just that clear understanding to say, I'll not have all the answers, but I'm here to support you.
Yeah, I mean, this is really important. As human beings, we often want to go in and fix things. We know men particularly, we want to go in and fix things. But if it's our children,
mothers too, we want.
Well, I was going to say, any parent wants to fix and help their child, and that's a huge pressure, because if you don't know what it is you're dealing with and how to approach it, we can end up charging in like a bull in a china shop, it's the saying we have over here in the UK. But if you can take that pressure off, which I think was a good explanation you made there, Sarah, and say, all right, I don't need to have the answers, I just need to ask the question, I just need to listen, then that's easier. We can all probably do that.
Beautiful, and well said. Let's now consider the workplace, mental health management in the workplace. How can managers support team members who are struggling with mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I was just with an organization yesterday, and this is conversations and talks I deliver regularly. And it's a massive subject. It really is. I think we are seeing great progress being made by a lot of companies at the moment. I think it's firstly really important that mental health and well-being is part of the culture of an organization. The culture of an organization actually drives well-being, not the other way around. You can't just bolt well-being into a culture that isn't right. So firstly, if you've got a culture that says we put employees first and you walk that talk, it's not just a mission statement on the CEO's wall. If you genuinely have a good culture, a people culture, then you're going to be able to ensure that well-being is assimilated into the company easily. So that's the first thing. The culture has to be right. Leaders, managers have to buy into employee well-being and mental health and really understand it, and treat it as the number one agenda in their business. It has to be discussed at board meetings, employee well-being. It has to be part of team meetings. And that can be a team meeting where we start the day off saying, right, before we talk about business or performance of the day, just go around the room. How are we doing today on a scale of 1 to 10? Who's at a 10 today? Who's maybe not at a 10, who's maybe at a 5 or 6 today, and just start to make this part of the process. Beyond that, as we look at day-to-day management, I think we need managers, frontline managers and leaders to develop and learn, and this can be trained, to have better EQ, emotional quantitative skills, to learn how to have difficult conversations with people. And if you think that difficult conversations could be about mental health, but difficult conversations are also about disciplinary matters, other personal issues that might be going on. A lot of managers are not good at having those kind of conversations. So I think all managers need to learn how to have difficult conversations in a way where they can be supportive and empathic towards an employee. So those skills need to be developed in managers. But from a performance point of view with an employee, I think there needs to be more one-to-one conversations taking place. Every employee has their own particular set of needs and requirements in life generally, but in the workplace. Many employees globally have obviously experienced in different ways the recent pandemic, the COVID pandemic. That has affected them. The impact maybe personally on them and their families, the fears and worries about that, the lockdowns and hybrid or remote working has affected people in lots of different ways. We're now seeing economic issues caused by the war in Ukraine and the financial crisis that we're seeing at the moment. Each of these circumstances will affect people differently. And I think it's really important that managers are regularly meeting individually with their employees, not just talking about work performance, but what I would call their whole world of work. That is, how is family life going? What are some of the concerns you have at the moment that, if I can understand, I can help you in your role and your job. So we definitely need to see more of that type of engagement within businesses where managers are looking at the whole person and not just their particular role or their job. So I hope that kind of partially answers that. That is a massive, massive topic I could go on for quite a long time, really.
You bring a lot of practical and useful insights on how people can actually deal with these issues in a very practical sense. One of the things that we do as a business is leadership development for the new era. So we teach people how to lead with a new mindset. And clearly, from what you are saying now, people need to unlearn the odd ways of leading people, because the odd way of leading people is very one-dimensional. Okay, people came and it was just work. We didn't talk about family. We didn't talk about any other thing that was affecting. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why women fell off the workforce, because no one even empathized. If you were a mother, oh, no, you don't talk about children here. You're just here for work. But I like, what you're bringing to the fore to say, as a manager, you need to be looking at almost a 360 degrees viewpoint of your team members, their family well-being. It's not just the work aspect. I really, really love that.
No, you're absolutely right. Because this all affects work. This all affects, work affects life, life affects work. And coming back to women in the workplace for a moment, if we look at the mental health spectrum, all the possible things from stress, anxiety, depression, bipolar, gender dysphoria, lots of, eating disorders, lots of different things. Let's not forget things like menopause for women that, is a huge issue. And any aspect of mental health, and let's take menopause as an example, can have a huge impact on women and therefore will impact on their work. And if as a manager, you don't know anything about menopause and you don't understand it, then you're not going to understand your female employees. So I think it's beholden on organizations and managers to understand mental health, which is why I go out and educate and deliver these talks and help people understand that mental health is not just anxiety and depression. There are a whole range of things that we probably need to be aware of, because they will affect your employees. And if you understand them better and how to support your employees, then you're going to create more of a thriving workplace, which benefits your business and everybody in it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Steve, the next conversation that one would have once they're looking at mental health is the issue of suicide. In fact, I did take a sneak peek at your LinkedIn profile, and the figures that you put there are staggering. You're saying about 800,000 people die to suicide every year. That is quite shocking. I was actually shocked to look at that statistics.
It is quite astounding, isn't it? That if we look at that now, and those figures have been slightly revised by the World Health Organization not that long ago to around about 700,000, but it's still a massive number of people. So we're looking at one person dying by suicide in the world every 40 seconds. We know that in the US, for example, it's the second biggest killer of young people aged between 10 and 34 years of age. We know in the UK, it is the biggest killer of young people under the age of 35. So not heart attack, not cancer, not diabetes, not road traffic accidents. It's suicide. What a lot of people as well are not aware of is that any loss, any death is tragic. It will have a profound effect, particularly if it's a sudden death. But suicide is this kind of death that has a different impact to a lot of the other deaths, and how it impacts other people. Because there are many different emotions, from guilt to, could I have done more in that situation, to utter disbelief and trauma and all kinds of things that happen. And we know that a death by suicide will impact directly or indirectly, on average, another 135 people. And when I first heard that figure, I thought, well, how can that be 100? Every death? Who are these 135 people? Well, I now know from my own experience who they are. They are the first responders, the police, the ambulance crews. They are the neighbours that had to come in and help and support, or try and support Jordan. It was too late. There were those immediately in the vicinity, of course, there that were impacted, and the wider neighbours in Jordan's street. There were Jordan's loved ones, his family members. There were his employees, his colleagues that he worked with. Over 30 of them attended his funeral. There are his network of friends. There are then the people that used to work with Jordan. And for a long time, I was continually getting messages from people that used to work with Jordan who just heard the news and were devastated, to the people that I had to go and speak to in the banks and the utilities companies and explain what had happened, and to look at their faces or hear their voices on the phone when I had to explain, what had happened and why we needed to close the account. And before you know it, you've got, if you look at the 700,000 people a year and multiply that by 135 people, you've got somewhere in the region of 90 million people globally who are impacted by or experience suicide each year. It's an incredible number. I was at an event this weekend, a dinner and a fundraising board to help raise money for the Jordan Legacy and some other charities. And just sitting on a table, and we opened up the conversation about, our work. And right next to me was a young man in his 40s that said, my father took his own life in 2019 as well. And the more that I talk about this subject, the more that I meet people that have experienced suicide, and yet before I never knew anyone, and that isn't because it didn't happen then. That's because I was never talking about it, and it was not an open conversation. So, you look at those numbers and think anyone you meet today or tomorrow, most likely, we know that almost 2 out of 3 people will have experienced suicide from some of the research that we've done, either directly or indirectly. So it is a massive issue.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's actually quite overwhelming when you start thinking through the numbers. Yeah, so then what do we do as society, as community, to prevent these cases? Is there anything that we can do about it?
Yeah, look, one of the bits, those figures are pretty stark, and these can sound overwhelming, as you say. But one of the things we do at the Jordan Legacy is we kind of move forward with hope, because all the research that's out there, Sarah, consistently comes back and says that most suicides are preventable, even right up till the final moment. How do they know that? Well, a lot of this has come from interviews and discussions with people that attempted to end their own lives. So they had a non-fatal attempt on their life. And in virtually every case, that person has said, at the moment that I attempted, I didn't want to die. I kind of realized at that moment I didn't want to die. Or more importantly, what the majority have said is that it isn't about the fact that I wanted to die, but what I did want to do was get rid of this pain. And that can be physical pain, of course, but more often than not, it's this mental trauma. And Jordan left a suicide note for us as his family, and within that note, just a short note, and when he asked us to forgive him, and it's just an awful thing to read, of course, but he said, this is the only route I can find. Because there's no other way I can find a way out. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. This is the only way to find a way out of these thoughts, that I'm having. And, we know that if we can support people, if we can provide them with the right support to reduce this utter feeling of hopelessness that they often have, then we can save lives. So if we just understand that the reasons why someone chooses to end their life are complex, highly complex, they can often go right back to childhood and be a series of events or experiences over many years. It's very rarely one thing. It's very rarely ever an impulsive act either. It's often planned, and we know from reading Jordan's journals after his death that he was first researching suicide in 2015.
Sure.
And looking for methods. So we know it's planned. When it reaches the actively thinking about suicide, that can become sometimes more impulsive because an opportunity presents itself. But if we can get in, if we can be aware, spot the signs, the changes in behavior, if we can intervene much earlier, then we can save many more lives. And we subscribe to the zero suicide philosophy, which, just to explain, is a community of people that understand and have experienced the zero suicide community. Actually comes from initially some work done in the healthcare sector, initially out of Detroit in the USA, and then into the UK and through Australia, where over a period of 4 years, the Henry Ford healthcare system over there, managed to reduce suicides by 75% of people known to the mental health services through a very particular practical framework they introduced. And in 1 year, in 2009, got the numbers down to zero. And that's where the term zero suicide comes from. So it's more of a philosophy. We know that we can't save everyone, but we know we have to be ambitious. So what do we do? It's a massive task, to answer your question. We have to, as a society, our cultures and our workplaces, talk more openly about suicide. We have to be more aware of the signs. We have to have better training. Training is really important for all of us as parents, all of us as children, all of us as employees, all of us as bosses at work. We have to know what is it we're looking for and how do we support someone who may be struggling. If we can all do that, we have to have better systems within our workplaces. We have to have processes such as one. I've just been talking with a company I've worked with recently where we talked about having disciplinary conversations with someone who may be suspended from work. And that could severely impact them. We know of cases where people have gone home and ended their own lives because they've been suspended from work. And if you can put a process in place, again, another practical tip as an HR department, and say, whenever we have a difficult conversation with an employee, it might be performance related, it might be a disciplinary matter. What safeguarding are we going to put in place for that employee immediately after the meeting? What is the support for them? And I've just had an example this week where a company I shared this with have done that, and they've told me they've saved a life this week because that person had plans on Monday because of what had happened. So, it's in our systems, in our processes, but it's in our general willingness as a society to learn about mental health, to understand what it is we're looking for and what we can do. I think beyond that, Sarah, I think we all just need to be a bit kinder to each other as well. Would go a long way.
Beautifully said, and just very, very practical insights that you bring again. I love that whole concept of having a safety strategy in the workplace. If we're going to discipline people because we care enough, let's just make sure we're covering their emotions, and we're not giving an opportunity for people to go there. I thought that is a very powerful strategy that every organization should actually be implementing. Yeah,
definitely. And so, and this knowledge came from a conversation I had with a mother who'd lost her 31-year-old son, Richard, to suicide because of that process. And her family campaigned very heavily for changes to take place. And, these are the kind of people I speak to, every day, and where I learn kind of my experiences is from, unfortunately, from other people's lived experience quite often.
Oh, well, Steve, as we come to the end of this conversation, that has just been so insightful. I've learned a lot. I feel like we need to have another podcast just to dive more.
I can't believe this hour has gone by almost already. That's pretty amazing. So
Yes, thank you so much. You've brought so much insight. You've brought so much help, and you've brought practical tips that people can actually latch onto and also implement either at a personal level or in the workplace as well. Just thank you for the work that you're doing. You're actually saving the world. That's exactly what you're doing.
Well, I've got an ambition to try and do that, but if in some small way we can help, and I know, and thank you for recognizing, the practical side of what we do. The Jordan Legacy, if anyone goes to thejordanlegacy.com website, you'll see, and we're about to have a brand new website launched in the new year. The one thing that I wanted to focus on, awareness is really important. Having the conversation is really important. But if we are not doing practical things to make a difference, then we're not going to change anything. And thank you for recognizing that, Sarah, because that is what we're about. We're about practical solutions to prevent suicide.
Thank you. And let me assure you, you're doing just that. Hey, you've been gifted with just practicality. Yeah. So as we end the conversation, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I just think the final point is we never thought that suicide would come knocking on our door. Not for 1 minute. And it can happen to anyone. There's no, it doesn't matter about race or gender or where you live or anything. It can absolutely impact anyone at all. And I think, what I just say to everybody is make a plan today to go out and learn about mental health or suicide. Whether you go in the UK, we have, and this will be accessible globally, the Zero Suicide Alliance has free training on the website, 30-minute video. And I met with a company yesterday and spoke to their employees. And one of their employees has, in his own words, saved his daughter's life and prevented her from taking her life by suicide, because he went to university and brought her home after watching this training, 30-minute training video that was free, absolutely free. So the Zero Suicide Alliance.com, I think, or .co.uk. Sorry, I need to check that. Sorry, .org could be for a charity. The Zero Suicide Alliance, you'll find it. Free video. In 30 minutes, you can learn what you need to do to have a conversation with someone. So my message is learn about this stuff and have it ready just in case you need to have a conversation. We can all do that, Sarah. Doesn't cost any money. It costs 30 minutes of our time, but it could save a life.
On that note, I will say thank you so much, Steve. It's been just an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we can all go out there and learn and remember to be kind. Kindness is key to saving lives as well. So till we meet again on this podcast, it's ciao ciao. And have a fantastic day ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate you allowing me to share my story today. Thank you.
Cheers then. Thank you very much.